Hello glam queens and kings, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Priscilla Chigariro and this is Glam and Vintage. We are continuing the story of my marriage. So if this is your first time here, please go right back and watch from chapter 1 part 1, because we are now on chapter 3 part 1. So go and grab yourself a drink, and happy holidays to everybody. Merry Christmas. I hope you all had a great one. I did. This was actually my very first Christmas together with my children in 4 years. So it was a really good one. So I hope you guys did too. I am having a tea today. Already had enough wine. So go grab your glass, whatever it is you're gonna have, and I will see you guys in a minute. I think one of the things that make this story so difficult to tell is that because obviously, you never know how anything is going to end. You would make some different decisions along the way. You would choose to not fight about certain things and focus on other things and so on. So I think in retrospect, there are some things that I might have done differently, but I feel like at the time, and now, to be honest with you, I guess my path was predetermined, and I ended up where I was supposed to end up. So I arrived in Zimbabwe. I don't think I've ever been so happy to actually be home. The second we touched down, even on the flight, it was the first time that I actually slept for a really, really long time. And I was really lucky. The stewardesses on my flight were so kind. They took care of my daughter and entertained her, and I just slept. It was the first time that I had actually had like a really peaceful sleep for a really long time. And I got home, I felt safe for the first time arriving in Zimbabwe, because obviously this is the feeling that you have when you get home. You're supposed to feel safe, and I felt safe. I felt like I was finally home. I was finally where I had been fighting to get to. My sister picked me up from the airport. It felt so good to actually see a friendly face and to just feel that closeness that I had been longing for months now. So, and she had arranged for us to stay at a friend of hers' house. So we went there, and she filled me in on everything that was happening legally. And over the next couple of days, she introduced me to my new lawyer, because she had found me a pro bono lawyer who had agreed to work on my case and had decided to do it pro bono because of the circumstances, which was great. So I went, I met him, and unfortunately, though, we could only stay at her friend's house for a week. One of the first things that I did as soon as I got there is I applied for the caveat to be put on the house, because it was still on sale. So we filed that, and then I had to deliver copies of that caveat or the application to all of the agents that had listed the house. So I did that, and then I also had to deliver a copy to my husband's lawyer. But and this lawyer was obviously Mambo Sasa, who was our family lawyer at the time, and they were using our home address, which was in Ballantine Park, as the address of service. So I took this caveat to this house where I had been living, and this was basically the first time that I walked onto this property, which I had basically poured my everything onto just a few months before. Basically, I would say like a little over a year before. And yeah, I arrived at the property and there was no guard. There was just this really young boy, like a 12-year-old boy, who came to the gate. He let us in, like we drove onto the property, and then I gave him the application. He didn't seem to know what was going on, and because there was basically like nothing there, like he basically just let us walk around, take a look at everything. So I called my lawyer and I asked him, you know, like, was there anything that was actually stopping me from just moving back in to this house? Because literally I had never moved out, to be honest. The last time that I had been to Zimbabwe, I had been living at this property, and all of this stuff with the bounces, etc., had happened when I was not there. And the eviction hadn't included me. It hadn't named me by name. It had just named my ex. So he said to me, actually, legally, there was nothing that was stopping me from just moving in onto the property and living there, because I technically had not been evicted. So we left that same day, went back to my sister's friend's house, packed everything, because in reality, it wasn't actually an option to stay at her house. And I had no other place that I could stay in the city. My only other option was to go to my dad's house, and that was outside Harare. So I didn't want to do that. So we packed up everything, and the following morning, we literally just drove and went back in, drove onto the property. And that was the beginning of something. That was the beginning of things that I never actually thought would be possible. I wasn't so naive that I didn't expect some kind of conflict or some kind of, retaliation. I expected them to probably, I don't know, send the police or something like that. But I was not prepared for what actually happened. When I planned the day before, when I had decided that I was going to move back onto the property, I called the guy who had found my cars. He was a private investigator, and he knew some security companies that would be able to provide security, etc. And obviously I knew that I would need some form of security, so he met me at the house when my sister and I arrived. I actually arrived at the property first, and then I went in. The young boy was still there by himself. He didn't react, he didn't call anybody. And then my sister arrived, and then the security guy arrived, and he came with 2 security guards with him. That is when this boy obviously called whoever he was working for. It did not take an hour. A group of bouncers, I think about 10 to 15 of them, arrived. They got out of their car and came to the gate. Because I guess they were known to this security guy that I was working with, they didn't do anything right then. They just got back into their car, they left when he asked them to leave. And then this guy, I was like to him, okay, do you think these guys are gonna come back? What's gonna happen, etc.? He was like, no, he's gonna leave these 2 guys and he's gonna go, and if there's any trouble, I should call him. So he left me there with these 2 security guards. It was myself. I was with a guy called Michael, who had been my manager for the space at the time. And since I had come back to Zimbabwe, he had, come to see me, and he had been helping me, just with general things, trying to put my stuff back together, trying to put my life back together. So I was with him, and my sister left with this security guy. They went into the city to go and do something. I've forgotten what it was. So it was myself and Michael and my daughter and these two security guards that were left on the property. Half an hour after they left, these guys came back, and there were now more of them. They were like definitely at least 15 or 16 of them. They came, forced the gate open, and Michael and I were on the veranda. So if you can imagine, the house was sort of in the middle of the property. There was a front garden, and then there was a back garden which led to the back gate. So they were at the gate, we were sort of at the back, by the front door, looking at the gate. Watched them force their way in. Michael and I just ran into the house. My daughter was asleep at the time. She was asleep in what was the library. For anybody who knows what the space was like, it was the very first room on the left when you entered the building. She was asleep in the library, so we ran into the library, locked the door, and just kept quiet. There was basically nowhere else we could go. There was nothing we could do. We just sat in there, watched from the window, and I didn't even know where my phone was. I couldn't call anybody, I couldn't do anything. And Michael's phone, he also didn't know where it was, because we had literally just moved in and I had left my bags in one of the cottages. So these guys ran onto the property, beat up the two security guards that were there. Like, one of them ran through the house and jumped over the fence at the back of the house, and it was into the yard of an American resident who worked at the American embassy, because our property bordered the property that belonged to the American embassy. He jumped into that yard, and their security team caught him. And the other guy, I'm not even sure where he ran to. So these guys ran into the house, were like kicking doors and like going to every single room and like yelling and screaming. I can't even remember whether or not I was scared. I think when something like that is happening, you just kind of go into shock. It's just not something that happens to anybody. Like, it's just not something that you ever imagine happening. So eventually, obviously, they came back to the library and saw that the door was locked. One guy kicked the door open, broke like the frame, the door like collapsed inwards, and then he walked in, and there were like this whole bunch of guys behind him, and one of them was actually filming what they were doing. There was a guy who had a whip and another one who had a golf club, and some other people had other things. But I just sat there. I was sitting on the couch, I was holding my daughter, and Michael was sitting next to me. The one guy who was, I guess, leading them, he walked in, started shouting. I don't even remember what he was saying. He pulled Michael, threw him on the ground, and the guy who had the whip started hitting him with this whip on his back and kicking him. And somehow Michael just managed to get free of them, and he ran out of the door and he left the building. And I just sat there. I wasn't scared. I think for me, I felt more angry. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I didn't respond to anything that he was saying. And he was shouting at me that this wasn't my property, that I should leave, that this was my ex's property, and that if I ever came back, they would come for me. And I just sat there. I was just quiet. Then he came towards me, I guess because I didn't react. And he grabbed my daughter. That's when I was like, what the F? Like, no. He grabbed my daughter, like just by one hand, like she was a doll. And he passed her to the other guy and then held me and hit me so hard on my face. He hit me so hard, I think I passed out. Like, I don't remember. I just remember coming to, and they were dragging me to the gate through the yard. There were two of them. One was holding my one arm and the other one was holding my other one, the one who was holding my daughter. And they were dragging me through to the gate. When we got to the gate, outside the gate, they just like threw me and threw my daughter at me. And again, told me that if I came back, they would come back for me. And then they just ran to their cars and drove off. I think I have just like, I was pissed. I was angry. Like, it's one thing to hit me yourself when you're a man. It's one thing for you to come and, you know, hit me yourself, but to send someone else, I just felt like this was just so cowardly. It just made me angry. It just made me really angry. So I picked up my daughter, and when they left, they closed the gate and told this little boy not to allow me back in. He was still standing at the gate, and this poor child was like traumatized. And they had ripped my shirt open. Like, I was wearing a buttoned up shirt. They ripped all the buttons off. I closed my shirt. I picked up my daughter. I walked back to the gate and I told him to open the gate. And I walked back inside and I closed the gate. And I went and I found my phone. I phoned my sister and I told her what happened. She phoned Highlands Police and then they came. And then one of the guys that had been involved in this, I guess they decided to cook up a story, just walked back and then started trying to tell the police that I had apparently arrived with some bouncers and had been the one that had tried to enter the premises without permission. But anyway, so that was the beginning of this war or conflict that happened surrounding this property. Every single other day that followed, there would be an attack of some kind. 2 weeks after that, I think this happened around the 23rd of November. It was basically about 10 days after I had arrived in Zimbabwe. Actually, 1 week after that, another group of bouncers came. They came in the middle of the night, around 10:30. We were asleep. They managed to get onto the property. They disarmed another guard who was at the gate, came into my house and actually pulled the duvet off me. I was asleep. Told me to get out of the house, and my sister and my daughter took away our phones, took everything, just marched us off the property. Again, I refused to be removed like that. I called the police, forced them to do something, because at this point I could see Highlands Police was extremely reluctant to help me. I would call Central Police or call PGHQ, that is the police headquarters in town. I would call them directly and I would tell them what was happening with every single thing that Highlands Police wouldn't respond to. And then they would send another group of police officers from a different division, like Marlborough, to help me and my sisters. And again, they removed these guys off the property, took them away, and it would be yet another court case. It almost became like it was a job. Every single week I was at the magistrate's court, criminal or civil, because Mambo Sasa now started filing documents. I mean, he started filing applications to the magistrate's court. And, you know, typically you would not file anything of serious consequence at the magistrate's court. You would file it with the high court, because this is a case that involved quite a lot of money and it's a large property. But then obviously he did it at the magistrate's court, because as I now know, the magistrate's court, if you want a decision in your favor, it's a matter of just how much you're willing to pay. So he filed everything at the magistrate's court. He said that I was in contempt of a court order. I had been evicted, but then obviously they had to now try to prove how I was evicted when the eviction order had my ex's name on it. So that went on for 2 months. And in those 2 months, through all of this, for starters, I neglect one thing. My daughter turned 1 on the 15th of November. She turned 1, and I wanted to celebrate. I wanted to have something small for her. I wanted to and no one of my extended family besides my father had actually seen her. So I arranged a birthday party for her. It was in December, probably a month after, probably around the 15th of December, I arranged a birthday party for her. The night before her birthday party, CID drugs came to the house. And I had some friends of mine there, and Michael, my manager, we were like blowing balloons and putting up decorations and all of that, just doing all the preps that you would do for a child's party. And CIG drugs came to the gate. There was a guard, and they asked to see me. They had a warrant, so they didn't let the guard come to me and call me to the gate. They were like, you know, in case I would run away or something. So they walked with the guard. They came into the house, just entered, and it was insane. They were just like, Priscilla Chigariro, who's Priscilla Chigariro? And I was like, yes, I am. They're like, okay. They came to me, pulled me to the side, showed me a warrant, a search warrant. The search warrant said that I was a drug dealer. I had drugs on the premises, and that they could search the premises. So I was like, obviously like, okay, whatever, fine, you know, you can search the premises. And keep in mind, this was a 5-acre premises with 11 buildings. So they disregarded the building that I was in. They just asked me, which building do you live in? And I showed them. They were like, okay, take us there. I took them there. When we got there, and it was like, because it was late already, my daughter was asleep and my sister was sleeping with her. So we went to this building, got inside, and they kind of just looked around, didn't search, went into the second bedroom, kind of just looked around, and then they asked me where I slept. And then I was like, I sleep in there. And then I told them, my sister's in there right now with my daughter. We're sharing a room because obviously of all these attacks, neither of us wants to sleep alone. So they were like, okay. And I asked them if I could go in first and wake my sister up and tell her what was happening so that she could get dressed before they would start their search, and they agreed. So I went and I told my sister, she got up, she got dressed. And then they came in and they started searching. And lo and behold, apparently, they found amongst our clothes, they found a bag, a small bag of, what should I call it? Of an illegal Class A drug, 0.5, 0.6 grams. I will link the article in the description below for you to read the details. They found that amongst our clothes. And, I just knew, obviously, like from the beginning, I knew it was obviously some kind of a setup. And remember what was supposed to happen to me in Russia. So now they had done it in Zimbabwe. Thankfully, whoever they had paid out of those agents that came, it wasn't the one who was in charge, because he was pissed when he saw the quantity, and he had been, like, whoever their informant who had given them the tip-off had said that I was a dealer. So I had huge quantities, etc., because they had come with reinforcements. Can you imagine? This was like an entire team, like CID drugs with guns, and like an entire team of people to come and search with guns, etc. And they had come and found only 0.6 grams. So he said to me, he just asked me what was happening. And I told him the story that was happening with my ex. And I told him the exact reason, everything, explained to him what was going on, where his tip-off had come from, and what was supposedly happen. And he said to me, okay, that's fine. He understands, but since they found something, no matter how small it is, I need to go to the station. They will talk to their boss, and then they will decide whether or not it's worth pursuing, or they'll just let me go. But they told me to tell one of my drivers to drive my car to go to the station. So at least that was a good sign that I wasn't actually arrested. I was going to be allowed to go home. So we went to the station. I called my lawyer, and it was both my sister and I. Since we were sharing a room, we were both taken to the station, including my daughter. Went to the station. We were there for an hour. They talked to my lawyer, discussed everything, and then told us that we could go home. But then they told us that we'd have to return in the morning. In the morning, we came back, and this was actually the morning of my daughter's party. And I told them, you know what, I'm just preparing for my daughter's party, etc. And then they were like to me, no, don't cancel, just continue. So we went early, went to the station, and the first thing that he said to me was, who on earth did you piss off? Because I didn't sleep last night. I had phone calls from the highest levels of police asking me why you were not in a cell. And I was like, well, remember what I told you. That is exactly what is happening. So I went with my sisters, had a discussion with his officer in charge, explained the situation, and he said, okay, we should go home if anything ever came up again. But in his opinion, he didn't think it was worth prosecuting, because this was not what they prosecuted, such small quantities and something that looked obviously like a setup, because there was just no other evidence, even like of personal use or anything like that. There was nothing to indicate that either of us knew about the presence of this drug. It was a dead end for them, so it was pointless. So he told us that we could go home. So we left, went home, immediately just dived into like arranging this little party for my daughter. But then, funny enough, in the press there were already articles that I had been arrested, and it was for possession of a Class A drug, and that I was in a cell, etc. And my lawyer just told me, you know what, just post a picture of yourself on social media at your daughter's birthday party, and that will probably just kill everything. And it did. So that failed then. And in the meantime, as always, I had been trying to rebuild myself, and I was also trying to have my cars released from the impound, and that was proving very challenging because Mambo Sasa was trying to assert himself to use the forces and the police that worked with him to so that my vehicles would not be released. And you know, I never wanted to include anybody's names in this story, but I personally feel like this man he fought me harder, I feel like, than my ex did. And he was actually my lawyer. He was a person that I trusted with personal company information, with all my legal details and information and documents, the way that anybody would trust their lawyer, give them absolutely everything, who had a power of attorney, etc. And he betrayed my trust, and he used that advantage to take over my businesses, my property, to change ownership of things. So if you're in Zimbabwe, just be wary of this man. So this fight with this man continued, and actually throughout most of this, my ex was quite silent. It became a fight between myself and Mambo Sasa at every court hearing I would go to, because he was now all of a sudden the representative of my company, which was trying to remove me from my property. And he in fact was driving my car that I used to drive, which he is currently still driving. That car belonged to me, but he decided to take it and start driving it. I just felt like he was driven by so much greed. He took over, and I guess my ex promised him that he could have whatever he wanted. He fought me as though I was his enemy, as though I had done something to him personally. So for a long time, I actually did not speak to my ex. It was more this battle between myself and this lawyer. At every single court case, at every hearing, it would be me against him. It was just insane. So late December, I actually reopened the space. Now in retrospect, I kind of feel like I was totally crazy. I feel like I don't know where I got the strength. I don't know where it came from. But throughout all of that, CID, drugs, etc., I was rebuilding the space. They hadn't managed to remove all of the equipment and everything off the premises. I had enough kitchen equipment to get my kitchen operational. The shisha lounge, I had built it myself from the beginning, so it was an easy rebuild. I rebuilt that. I still had some furniture and so on. And so in late December, I reopened the space. This was 2019. And it operated throughout January and February. Throughout all of this, there were proceedings that were happening in court, them trying to evict me, to remove me from the premises, to say I was actually party to the original eviction. So I remained on the property, and then ultimately I chose to leave the property. That was at the end of February. I preferred for my business to continue to operate on the premises because obviously I needed the money and it wasn't necessary for me to continue to keep living there. So I asked a really good friend of mine who had a house in Hoggetty Hill, and he didn't live in the country all the time, if I could stay in, my sister and I and my daughter could stay in his home whilst I tried to sort everything else that was going on. And he said yes. So I moved. I left the premises. I did not go back. This friend was actually, it was someone that I had met through business, and I had actually introduced him to my ex because I knew about, my ex, when he first came to Zimbabwe, he didn't know a lot of people. So I introduced him to a lot of people, and this was one of the people I introduced him to. But thankfully, this man obviously remembered that he had been my friend first. So whilst all of this was happening with my ex, even though my ex called him like 100 times and tried to tell him to tell me to leave his house, to throw me out of his house, he didn't do it. He knew exactly what was going on, and he was not going to support it. I moved, and then my business was left on the property. Now they had this issue. My business was still operating, and obviously private businesses are not associated to a person. Private businesses are their own personas. So if you want to remove a business from a property, you have to actually evict the business in its own right. But as always, Mamusasa went to the magistrate's court and filed some documents saying that I was still in contempt, even though I personally was no longer on the property. My business was there, and my business was an alter ego of myself. And this was filed in the magistrate's court. Again, an issue that was supposed to be filed in the High Court. And I don't know, amongst themselves with the magistrates there, they decided that he was right and that my business must also be removed from the property. But then they had no very clear legal way of doing so. So one day, mid-March, I think it was around the 12th of March, I dropped off my daughter at her preschool. I went to Michael's house to pick him up so that we could go and buy stock. When I got to his house, police just came to my door, and a messenger of court came, pulled out the keys from my ignition, and opened my door. They were like, step out of the car, blah, 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 blah. I was like, okay, I got out of the car. They were like, oh, you're under arrest for contempt. And didn't put handcuffs on me, just told me that they were taking me to ch3.pt1. ch3.pt1 is a maximum security prison in Harare. It's the worst prison that you can go to. I was like, what the F? I didn't resist. I got into their car with them, but Michael had come out, so I gave him my car keys. I actually, for the first time, posted on social media these ridiculous documents that they used to arrest me. I mean, it's not normal to just be picked up off the street and taken straight to ch3.pt1. I've never heard of anything like that happening to anybody. So they took me, and my first thing I told Michael was to immediately call one of my drivers for him to take the car to my daughter's school and pick her up immediately. I knew that I had this feeling within me that this was more than just arresting me. There was something else that was at play, and I was right. He was quick. At least he drove to my daughter's school. He picked her up and my nanny, and gave one of my drivers the car, who met my lawyer, because on the drive to ch3.pt1, I was making all of these phone calls. Obviously, they couldn't stop me from making phone calls. I made all of these phone calls and made all of these arrangements. When I got there, it took about an hour before my lawyer came with my daughter. When he came with an application that my ex had immediately filed. he had been just served with a custody application for my daughter because apparently I had been arrested and I was in jail. So my ex was trying to use this as an opportunity, get me arrested, get custody of my daughter, and probably take her out of the country. It was an urgent application in the High Court and the hearing was supposed to be the next day. But according to Zimbabwean law, because my daughter was below 2 years old, if I am incarcerated, she goes with me. So he brought her and she was brought in with me. And I was like, okay, that was fine. Obviously, I was extremely traumatized. I mean, it is not like ch3.pt is just, to try to describe the conditions is not 100%. It's not possible. Just a little bit. There are no running showers, there are no toilets, it's pit toilets. You take a bath in a bucket, well, it's not even a bath, you bath in the bucket. There's no hot water to heat up your water. You just leave it in the sun for a while and then you use that to bath. Hot water is only provided for kids. The bedding is just, yeah, it's just like everything. The food, the conditions were just beyond bad. But I was fine. A part of me was actually okay because my time there, I actually rested. If you can just imagine, like, I had not had a single good night's sleep since I had come back to Zimbabwe, since I left my sister's friend's house. Even when I was there, I didn't feel quite safe. I just, like, after I arrived, my sister told me everything that had been happening, and I immediately stopped feeling like Zimbabwe was a safe place for me. So when I was there in prison, I had no phone, you know, no way to contact the outside world. The only time I saw anybody was the once a day when my sister or my father or someone would come and visit me, because they would bring me food every day. I felt very lucky. I didn't have to eat the food in the prison because my restaurant was operating. They would just bring me food from the restaurant every day. I had food for my daughter. I was making money daily, obviously, because my business was operating. And you know, I felt so terrible for the conditions that were in there that I also just got stuff for the women that were in the ward with me. It was just, I just felt like it was ridiculous that you couldn't have a broom or anything like that. You actually had to do I did an application for us to be allowed to have a mop and a broom in our ward. It was just, I don't know, but it gave me a chance to actually reflect on my life, reflect on the things that I felt were like problems in my life, looking at what other people had to deal with. And it humbles you. It really humbles you to see how other people are forced to live every day and the conditions that they are forced to accept. And I felt lucky to be able to have food from outside. I couldn't provide food for everybody, but I provided what I could. But I rested as well. Because I was a civil prisoner, I was the only civil prisoner, because they had no clue why I was there. I didn't have to wear a prison uniform. I wore my own clothes. I didn't have to do any work because they had no idea why I was there. There was just no clear indication how long I would be there or what I was there for. So I just kind of waited in prison. And after 12 days, Mambo Sasa brought some armed bouncers again and guards onto the property. Once again, chased all the clients and customers and all of the employees of the property and took over the space once again. And the day after that, he sent a letter to the warden at ch3.pt1 which came with the messenger of court who had brought me there, saying that they could release me. And I was released from prison. And this was just before lockdown began. International lockdown. And that is all that was happening in Zimbabwe. But behind all of that, there was another story happening in the US. This story is just so layered that this is another reason why I kind of don't even know how I made it through that time, like having to function on so many different levels and to keep everything going. This Hague petition that I had filed after 6 months of my son being in the United States, my ex filed an application for custody because the laws in Massachusetts allow you to file for custody as soon as a child has been in the state for 6 months. And obviously he had no idea that I had filed this petition and he didn't know what I was doing. So I was just in January just served with these papers by Mambusasa at one of our many hearings. And I took them. I was like, okay. I panicked a little bit because I didn't know if the State Department could help me. But I immediately sent them the application and they told me, thankfully, not to worry. They wrote to the judge and they told the judge that this was a child who had been kidnapped. So thankfully the judge, his lawyer, that there would be nothing that would happen until the end of the Hague petition, and at least that stayed that action. So we basically kind of focused on everything that was happening in Zimbabwe whilst I was building my case in the United States. A part of me felt like this lockdown had actually just been created for me. It was the break that I needed. It gave me the ability and the time to actually just recharge.